So I'm going to just give a brief overview. Right here. So this is just a program. I know for people in the room, there are QR codes on your tables. So if you want to see the program, you just have to go into the QR code and you can see more information about the program and our speakers and the background of Checkup. So I'm going to kind of go into my overview until 6:40, and then we'll go into some of our speakers and the main parts of today. So I have some slides, but I'm going to move through them pretty quickly. I'm only going to go through the first few. We have some programs. You can always go to our YouTube channel. Our website is checkup, check-up at wayne.edu. There, you can find our YouTube page and get a link there. You can see some of our recent programs, and you can also see an overview. I've talked about where we've come from, how we started. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that today. I will just kind of give you just the broad strokes. Again, here's our website and our website name. And just a little bit of background, we were established in 2021 as part of a program, kind of a competition almost at Wayne State University called Bold Moves. And we were one of the final ideas selected because we wanted to focus on health equity and health equity research. So again, as I said, we're here to kind of advance community academic partnerships and really move the work that we're doing, the work throughout our university, to being more engaged with community and even moving towards what's called community-based participatory research, right? Where there is more leadership and control from community members and stakeholders in the work that we do. In terms of Checkup and our focus right now, and it's evolving and it probably will continue to evolve, we have 3 health equity priority areas that includes cancer control, cardiovascular health, and mental health. And we have research networks that focus on specific populations. Right now, we're focused on LGBTQ health, MENA, Middle Eastern, North African, refugee and immigrant health, and Black health and racial equity. And we work with a wide range of organizations and offices and centers at Wayne State University and beyond to do this work. And I just want to highlight our core principles and practices. Again, I mentioned before the importance of community engagement and CBPR, community-based participatory research, but also we have a behavioral medicine focus. We're not, at least at this point, focused on bench science, lab science. We're focused on population health, right? And in behavioral medicine, we're talking about the intersection between biological or biomedical kind of processes and understanding and knowledge, with psychological knowledge, with community knowledge, psychosocial knowledge, how those things intersect to affect health. So that's what behavioral medicine kind of refers to. It's not behavioral health like mental health care. It's a little bit broader than that. The application of a social ecological model, that we understand it's not only about what people want to do with their health, their own kind of individual will or their intention, or even the barriers that people face to healthcare. We live in communities, we live in systems that are governed by laws and policies. There are a lot of things that come to bear upon a person's individual health behaviors and the way they engage with healthcare systems. So we try to be conscious of what's going on at the level of community, what's going on at the level of our institutions, what's going on at the level of our policy and legislations that affect healthcare and health outcomes. Public health critical race praxis. I just talked about this a few days ago at a seminar or a symposium at Wayne State. Basically, it's critical race theory as applied to public health, and it's based on an understanding that structural racism is a major driver of health inequities and disparities in our community and across the nation. And we have to acknowledge the issue of race and power and privilege when it comes to healthcare and health outcomes. And lastly, transdisciplinary team science. We want people from all different backgrounds, different disciplines and trainings to work together to create something that's more than the sum of its parts, to create a new way of doing things. And I think there's a lot of space for doing things in a new way, for doing things in a different way. The health disparities and problems in our city, in our region, across our nation they're abundant. So we need a lot of different types of strategies to address them. One size doesn't have to fit all. We need a lot of different ideas and a lot of different people at the table. So from there, I'm just going to move on to just talk about some of our community partners who have worked with us in different ways. I want to acknowledge Lisa Braddix, and hopefully she's online. I know she wasn't able to be here in person today, but she actually is the Health Equity Director of the Southeast Michigan Health Association, or SEMHA, and she's just been an incredible partner with us in doing this work. She is the chair of our steering committee. And I want to just kind of acknowledge the organizations you see on the screen who are either part of our steering committee, but they've also been part of our planning committee for our community engaged research symposium that we hold every year. They've been part of our research networks. So again, I want to thank and acknowledge all the organizations that you see who have kind of interacted with us and contributed to this work in some way. We're deeply grateful for all of them. So at this point, we're already probably at 6:40. Like I said, there are other places where you can see more of the details of checkup, but I just wanted to give those broad strokes. So I'm going to just kind of fly through this really quickly and talk about today's, first of all, yeah, I want to talk about, actually, before I go on, I'll talk about some more recent work from CVS Health. We recently received some funding from CVS Health, the foundation, that makes us part of a national community equity alliance. So they're funding our work here at Wayne State University, as well as Sinai Hospital in Chicago. We're also, they're also funding the Harry Medical School in Nashville. And this event today is actually part of this work, so it's important. I really want to acknowledge CVS Health and thank them for their support of what we're doing here today. And through this work and through their support, we're going to be continuing to do these workshops to talk about community engagement and community partnerships. And we're also going to be building a coalition, a multi-sector coalition of organizations and residents from across Detroit and Metro Detroit to work together to, again, think about health equity solutions, hopefully in creative and novel ways. We're calling this, based on the CVS Health work, the Detroit Community Health Equity Alliance, or DCHEA. So, if you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out to us. We'll have that information at the end of the program. You can also go to our website and find information about that. So, and I want to acknowledge again all our partners in that work with CVS Health. So let me go on to today's objectives. So I'll just read them here. Again, we're focused today on what are best practices and what are things we need to be thinking about when when community stakeholders and academics and universities and hospitals partner, right? What kind of foundation do we need to build to make sure that work is meaningful and sustainable and equitable? We want to think about today's strategies for connecting with relevant community stakeholders, clarifying roles and frameworks for compensation around the work. That's always important. We want to identify existing resources available for formalizing these relationships and partnerships. We want to think about ethical considerations today. We want to think about existing resources for improving research partnerships and partner evaluation tools. And we're going to be hearing a lot today from our presenters around their experiences, their real world experiences, case studies. So we're going to hopefully hear a lot of narratives and stories around this type of work. So I'm really excited for all the people that we have presenting today. So before we move on, a lot of this will align with something we've been able to create. I want to acknowledge Alex Sass, who's in the room today, our manager for research and operations, as well as Tanaya Kinney, she's our manager for the CVS Health work, and all our other team members who helped to build this and get this ready for today. This is an evolving tool that you can find on our website, resources and tools for community academic partnerships. And with each of those little plus signs that you see, you can click it and it'll drop down and you can find toolkits, agreement forms, things around data sharing and data agreements, information around budgeting for partnerships and funding opportunities as well, evaluation tools. So this is really, I think, an incredible resource that we're trying to just spread far and wide to make it easier to do this work and to do it in a kind of a very systematic, structured way. So I'm very excited about that. Okay. So let me just give an overview of the presenters today. We're really pleased to have Chandra McMillian, CEO and founder of the McMillian Group, Detroit 21 lead consultant and a member of our steering committee. So welcome to Chandra. Elizabeth Towner, assistant professor of family medicine and public health science at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Dr. Alicia Sneed, who is an assistant professor at the Institute of Gerontology and the Department of Psychology at Wayne State. And I'm going to be turning it over right now to Carrie Leach, Dr. Carrie Leach, who's a professor in the Institute of Gerontology as well, and focuses as the community engagement co-leader for CURES. That's the Center for Urban Responses to Environmental Stressors. And she is also our associate center director for Checkup in Community Inclusion. So here, I think I'm going to turn it over. Thank you, everyone. And I'll invite everybody, all the presenters, maybe you can come up to the table and we can get ready. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, everybody. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see everybody online. We did have a question online. Will this be recorded? It will, and it will be archived, and it will be on the website page that Haley just showed you. So it is my job to talk about the principles of community engaged research, and so that's what I'm going to do. Just so you know, there's also a program for all of you that just came in. Alex and Naya have coordinated a lot of things, so you can get the program and see all of the background information by using the QR code on your table. Everybody would have received that online in the chat, and so working with these two different audiences is fun and new and interesting. So if you're missing something or you have questions as we go, please put those in the chat. Naya is monitoring that as we go along. So this is my part. We're going to talk about principles of community engaged research. And just so you know, these slides will be available. And this is also a resource. I have included links to everything that I'm going to refer to, the different principles and all of the tools here. This in itself is a tool for everybody that is attending and will be archived as well. So I want to start. I work in health equity. I love this wheel of power and privilege and refer to it when I'm describing the kind of person that I am in this work, how I'm close, near and far to the different communities I work with, including older adults. I'm in gerontology, so I'm really passionate about what happens when you're 75, 85, and 95 and how you access information. And so I, Carrie, am a white, middle-aged, educated, heterosexual, cisgender female. I am passionate about health in Detroit. I actually went to DPS public schools when I lived in my grandmother's basement. I love Detroit. If you ask me where I grew up, I'd say Dearborn. That's the longest period of time I spent in my childhood. And also have lived in Ferndale, Redford, and Livonia, so I'm kind of a child of Southeast Michigan, and also a first-generation college graduate. So I won't get into all of the my background and expertise. You can read all about all the speakers in the program online. And so I welcome you to do that. And just inserted a few pictures of my community co-authors and mentors of mine. And someone that's missing actually from this picture is a mentor of mine who's Tom Jankowski, who's in the audience today. So I just want to acknowledge him. So I wanted to, you're going to see a slide like this throughout our presentation, and I've just kind of rebranded it for Wayne State for our purposes. But you'll see on the left side of the slide that community engagement often involves community outreach, and that's important. We've all learned, right, given the COVID pandemic, and we really want the CDC to do outreach and give us information, and that's important. And we don't necessarily need a bi-directional exchange of information. There's a place for all of this community engagement across this continuum, and you'll see the arrow that kind of goes up. It's community involvement goes up, as does communication, the time that you're spending with people, as does trust, and the ultimate impact that comes over as you move to the right side of the screen. So in my own experience, I've been involved in all of these blocks, from outreach to consultation to involvement and close collaboration. Rochelle Chapman, that's facilitating the online version of this, I work closely with at Cures, which is an environmental health center. One of my partners is online there as well, Sandra Turner Handy, and we really are very collaborative in nature in our work. But I've also been involved in and have been fortunate to have the experience of doing a CBPR, which is this community-based participatory research that would be on the far right end. So community engagement, there's a spectrum and a continuum, and this is just a model that you can use as a heuristic device to kind of see where all of that lands. What you're going to hear a lot are acronyms, and I hope that I clarified some of those. We really need to have shared language, and when we're using acronyms, make sure that everybody is on the same page. So I have 2 stars here because you're going to hear CBPR a lot, which is community-based participatory research, which is a real shared leadership kind of research, and CENR, this is a community engaged research focused event, and CE&R is community engaged research. So I just want to offer some acronyms so we're all speaking the same language and using the same terms. I also would encourage you to raise your hand and go, you lost me, what is that? Can you say more about that? Because we want everybody to be on the same page here. A few other things, an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, NIH, National Institute of Health, PI. I just went through the slides and picked up some acronyms and just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to get on the same page. Thank you, Sandra. And so there are principles that you'll find for a variety of community engaged research. I have on the left-hand side, community engagement principles, and on the right-hand side, CBPR, community-based participatory research principles. So I'm going to talk through those, and then what you'll hear throughout this workshop is examples, case studies, filling in context for these experiences. I'm just going to talk about the principles and then talk through some of the evaluation feedback that I've learned working in a few different settings, community engaged research, community-based participatory research, so that you're hearing the voices of people that have had that experience. So I'm not just telling you my experience, but that we're bringing in the voices of people that I've collaborated with. So I think that's important. CBPR, we're on the right side of the screen. I'm going to give you a few examples and talk through these principles. One recognizes the community as a unit of identity. There's already a spelling error, sorry about that. So I want to give you an example of that. When we did one of our environmental health chats in Detroit, we have a community advisory board, which is our CAB, and we went to put on an event around air quality, right? And we were doing the event under the Ambassador Bridge, talking about diesel emissions, right? And what's happening in that neighborhood. And so we wanted to present some science around that, some air pollution. But what we heard in our planning group is like, well, I don't live in that neighborhood. And actually the air pollution that affects me is coming from Marathon Oil Refinery or other areas. And so we want to acknowledge one of the principles of community engaged research is that we're acknowledging there are communities within communities, right? There isn't a blanket approach, but acknowledging different age groups or neighborhoods. And so an important principle for community engaged work. Building on strengths and resources within the community. I can tell you in all of my partnered research, all of the partners that I've had that have helped me develop study instruments and connected me with resources in their community, allowed me to connect easier, especially with hard to reach older adults. My research has focused on people over the age of 75. And so being able to sit in the living room with a 96-year-old older adult in their home is not something I would be afforded the opportunity to do without those connections. And so really that partnered approach really enables you to get at those harder to reach people that are generally underrepresented in research. And so I just can't stress that enough. Obviously, collaborative, equitable partnerships. We're going to hear some great, I've gone through all the slides. You're going to have excellent examples about what does it mean to have equity and partnerships. And I don't think anyone's going to miss that topic, the rest of our speakers today. So you're going to hear a lot about that. Promoting co-learning. I am a student of my partners and they are teachers and mentors of mine. And I hope that they're learning as much as I am as we go through the process. And the idea of community-based participatory research is that we all have expertise that we're bringing to the table, whether that's older adults in my case, because I'm 49-year-old and I'm not having the experience of living to 80 years old or 90 years old. And so that co-learning part is really important, and capacity building. You're also going to hear some great examples of the BYC building your capacity curriculum that Elizabeth's going to share a little bit about. And so you're going to have great examples of that as well. Integrates and achieves a balance between research and action for the mutual benefit of all partners. The idea is in community-based participatory research, you would actually be working towards a plan of action. So you're starting the project with the end in mind, right? And I'll give you an example of that. I can't see a clock, so I don't know how I am on time. Okay. So in one of the counties that I was working in, I entered that project with the idea that I was really interested in rural aging. And the partners that I had in that particular project said, well, interesting for you, but we have to make decisions and compel the decision makers in that particular community to take action. And only 38% of our county is rural. And so that will apply to about 40% of that group of, which was the Commission on Aging in that county. And so that was one of the things that went right out the window. If it's not going to lead to action and we're not going to be able to make impact or use data that's compelling to the entire group of decision makers, I haven't done a good job doing a CBPR project. Does that make sense? Everybody with me so far? Okay. Okay, involves a system development through a cyclical iterative process. You take a lot of information, adjust, and we use a process of learning as we go through the discovery process from the beginning of the project through the end of it. And some of those are really small, some of those are big iterative changes that go through, but even the process of analyzing data, 5 minutes left, yes, okay. Even the process of analyzing data, even the process that I've used had to be tweaked and changed as I learned in sitting in a room and analyzing pages and pages of data that I needed to adjust things. For instance, we're going to talk about ethics. One of my partners actually was able to identify comments from an interview and said, oh, I know that's Susan. And Susan would say, and she started to explain what Susan was saying. I'm not saying a word, not validating that, but really had to change how I even presented the data right to the community partners who were going to analyze that. So it's a cycle of learning, adjusting, changing as new discoveries come to the fore. So it disseminates finding and knowledge. This really requires a balance between what are the goals of a community that wants to make change and what are the goals of somebody like me that works in research and has to publish papers or raise funds. And that's a balance. You want to be able to make change, invite people into your writing and publishing process, but also respecting when people decline that offer, want to be involved, or also the amount of effort that you contribute to the community. For instance, my CBPR project ended technically in early 19. It was through 2022, one of my research partners, Pamela Pan, God bless her soul, while we're writing a paper, checked my email, and she had passed away, had gone to the hospital. 2 days later, she passed away. God bless her, so I'm gonna get weepy. Anyway, that's part of the process of disseminating findings, bringing, hopefully, people want to participate in the publication academic process, but it's really the goal of CBPR is be able to create data that people can use to make change and improvements in whatever it is that you're studying. That is the ultimate goal. You're starting with the end in mind so that all of the work has an eye towards the action orientation. Does that make sense so far? Okay. Involves a long-term process. You're going to also hear some projects and the amount of time that it takes. And also talking about when the project ends, what happens in terms of sustainability. An average partnership lasts, I just read this recently, 2 to 3 years. And for me, those partnerships started in 2014 or 2015. Tom could audit that statement. But that's a long time. And it's not like you start the project, it concludes and it's over. There's a lot more that needs to be done. And all I would say is be prepared to be surprised. But that commitment and long game is part of community-based participatory research. And I just was reading the American Journal of Public Health recently and noticed, I have a link here so you can access this article, but the first time I've seen these CBPR principles merged with what Haley was just referring to, critical race theory praxis, merged with these CBPR principles. So we don't have time here now to get into that, but I did just want to note this. It's January 2023, very new and a great article that you'll have access to that won't be behind a paywall. And so here's another model, a CBPR conceptual model. And the reason I share this is because there's a focus group guide that you can use and look at the kind of group dynamics in that little box. And I know you probably can't see that well, but when you have the slides, you'll see all of those things that our other speakers are going to refer to throughout the presentation. And maybe it gets a little bit bigger here. So I'm going to read a few of those because Naya has given me a 2-minute warning. Thank you, Naya. And I just want to talk about some of the comments here. So we're talking about structural dynamics, individual and relational dynamics. And so one of my partners, reflecting on our process after 7 years, referred to the length of time in our partnership as it matters in affecting our outcomes. And he said, the reason that you're here is because of the trust that you built up in a community needs assessment process. You're riding on the coattails of that trust and credibility that you've already built. And so length of time was important to him. And so I just wanted to note that. A few other notes in terms of the individual dynamics and also the relational dynamics that affect whether or not you have a successful project is a motivations for participating, and that's under the individual ones. So one of my partners had said, if this process in your product helps me have more data so that I can have a better chance of writing grants, that's the motivation for being involved. And so the model that I'm giving to you is a good guide for having conversations around the partnerships. And that was the reason I included it here. I also this was a cultural identities and humility note that someone made. I had never considered this before, but one of my partners said, if you would have came in here with a suit, and these are his words, or spoke using complex terminology and talking about all this higher level data, we would have moved on to somebody else. And so even the clothes that we're showing up in and how we're presenting ourselves in community, those things matter. And that was the first time I ever really thought about, what am I wearing? How am I showing up? I don't want to show up in a suit and put a distance farther between me and anyone else. And so a few other quotes here. I won't read through these because we do need to move along, but this is a great model if you need to refer to something, to be able to think about how do these dynamics affect our interactions with people. And you'll hear a lot about that from my co-speakers here. And then the final thing I want to leave you with is just this table that really breaks down the difference between a traditional research approach, which is an investigator-driven research project, compared with what it looks like to do research in a community and then community-based participatory research. I really like this table. It's from Hacker. She wrote a book. It's a very slim book. It's not one of those CVPR books. It's like a manageable 100-page book and a great tool for you. And so this just really is helpful to look at how those things differ. And so I'll leave it with that. And that should be it for me. So I will turn it over to the next speaker, which I think is Chandra.
Yes,
Thank you for that, Carrie, for that overview and for that background. So next, we're going to hear about laying the foundations for successful community engaged partnerships. And we're going to hear from, again, Chandra McMillian, who is founder of the McMillian Group, which is a full-service strategy, full-service strategy consulting, project leadership, and implementation support service and firm specializing in organizational development, leadership, and board development, community change, and social justice. And Detroit 21 is one of her key clients, and we're really grateful that she has chosen to work with Checkup, and we're really glad that she's here to share her insights. So I'm going to please welcome Chandra McMillian.
all right. I have to adjust this just a little bit. Good evening, everyone. And hopefully I'm not going to mess anything up, but this is the smallest podium I've ever had. So I just wanted a little room for my iPhone so that I could also refer to my notes. So thank you. All right, well, again, good evening, everyone, both in person and online. It really has been a pleasure working with Checkup, and it's good to get out on such a beautiful day. I just want to say a little bit about how much I love Detroit and how much I love actually supporting this type of work. What I'm going to share with you this evening, I'm not going to mention any specific names, but I am going to speak from the many clients that I have worked with over time. So these will be community engaged partnership principles and just some words to really think about and some perspectives, but they are going to be based on real life examples of having worked with federal, state, county, regional, and city government, working with philanthropy, nonprofits, and educational/academic organizations, having worked with businesses, both small and large, but all because of their mission-driven purpose in terms of associated with making impact in community, and then also actually working with collections of leaders or community associations. So what I'm going to share literally transcends all of the different type of individuals that could be brought to this kind of a partnership. And that would include opportunities to work in places and with organizations that are religious in nature as well. So first, just a couple things that I also wanted to just highlight that as a strategy consultant, because full service kind of strategy and organizational development, leadership development is the core of the work that I do. What I have found is that when I speak to, and the clients that I'm working with, when we talk about community-based participatory research or community, like engaged partnerships, it does involve everyone at all stages. And so when I say stages, that includes, and probably most importantly, money. So funding is really one of those things that really differentiates, are we really all partners, or is one entity such as a government entity, an academic entity getting money, and then others are involved, but all the money rests over here. So obviously, in terms of working to really create diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really does begin with really looking at who is even getting paid to show up and how people are engaged in the process just from a financial standpoint, but also, as was mentioned earlier, in terms of the communication, how are we even talking about, things? So making sure that we are on the same, page. Also has to do with credit, who's getting credit for what we're doing and who's even determining how things are going to be branded, etc. But when I say all phases, I literally mean all phases. So I just want to start by lifting up some of the phases. And if you can think of some additional ones as I'm going through this, raise your hand, because I think that it's important to really look at, does all mean all? All literally means all phases. So from the issue, opportunity, challenge, problem identification phase, needs assessment, how you're bringing people together, the assembly, the selection, who's participating, how they're participating, the planning, design, development, implementation, evaluation, monitoring, improvement processes, sunsetting of the rejuvenation of it. Are there other elements when you think about any sort of major initiative or research project or partnership? Are there other elements that come to your mind that I didn't mention that we should also lift up? Any other phase or stage of this type of work? Okay, so again, all means, all. So when we're talking about participatory or engaged, it means that we're coming together as partners throughout every element of that process. And so I think that by doing this, we have an opportunity that I think sometimes gets overlooked. And that's the opportunity, first and foremost, to grow together. When we talk about language, but when we also talk about mindset, sometimes the thought is like, oh, how do we help these people? And these people often means the community, but the community may have some capacity building or other opportunities to grow. But if you're in a partnership, everybody should be looking at how they're going to grow. Obviously, universities are learning institutions, but in the partnership, there may be a lot that they need to learn. Governments, again, they may bring lots of things to the table, but there's a lot that they need to learn, foundations, etc. So again, it's an opportunity for everybody to be learning together and listening together. It is important to recognize the power dynamics and to be very intentional around how the power is shared and structured, because a lot of things such as the basics of like, when are you going to meet is actually a power play. So if the meetings are during the daytime, for community members, even leaders of community organizations, oftentimes that becomes a challenge. Therefore, we have meetings in the evening like we do, today. Also, in terms of just transformational impact, Again, there's all sort of partnerships, but if you're trying to bring about real change in community and for populations, I just want to offer a few things. One, by doing it the way that we're talking about, it produces meaningful outcomes, because there's all sort of research and there's all sort of partnerships that the community never sees and that the world may never really even know about. So by doing it in the ways we're talking about something that is really going to be meaningful to people who really need that change to happen. It also produces better incomes. It also produces sustainable and lasting change. And then the last piece is that there can be lots of activity, but again, it doesn't mean that it's producing transformation. And so it's important to look at not only what you're going to do, which is activity, but like who are you going to be, as well as what you're looking to have. So with that, I'm going to go through a couple of slides. So the first thing here, and I see that on this screen, I need to move this down because it's blocking my headers. That the first principle that I just want to highlight, and this is something that many of you may have heard before, there is one person that's associated with a part of this quote. This is also potentially considered to be almost like an African proverb. So I won't give attribution because many people have kind of taken credit for it, but I think it's probably the foundational principle of everything that I've already talked about, which is nothing about us without us is for us. So when we're talking academic and community partnerships, that would imply that academia should not be doing community engaged, community-based, community participatory research without involving the community. But as I said, this is a principle that's not specific to that dynamic. Everything that I'm going to share speaks to no matter what group is coming together. So it's always a principle to think about, like, what is it that you're seeking to do? And if you are seeking to do anything with any population that you're trying to change, you really need to have a broad, diverse group of people from that population engaged in that change. Principle number 2, equity. And again, all of us are going to be talking about equity, but I want to offer up for equity, which is a transformational partnership, is essentially about social justice.
I'm so proud of that.
Not just looooking to have new
I recognize that was
programs. We're literally looking at structural and systemic and political change, power change, and literally not just change for existing individuals, but everybody who is born into the environment and later is also being impacted by that sort of change. So it's the right of everybody to participate, to make decisions, and to determine the future of their neighborhoods and community. To be community, that speaks again fundamentally to the being. Once we establish that everybody needs to be involved, sometimes more important than what you're going to do is who you're going to be. So establishing community, again, as a foundation for any success. And what I find in the majority of my work, no matter how long a group, a coalition, a partnership has been together, if there's struggles, if there's challenges, if there's lack of real impact, it has to do with there hasn't been real community established, or it's a community where there's lots of history. And in Detroit, there's lots of history. So there's distrust, there's wars, there's personality conflicts, there's, you know, this is what you for real did to me before and all that kind of stuff. So really understanding, like, what does it take for people to really be community together is more important than the system, organizational, or leadership type of change that you're looking to create. Because if you're not being community first, all those things can get overturned, but more likely than not, they're not actually gonna happen. I mean, you can write something up on a paper that makes it look good, but again, we're talking about real change that people can see, and that the future is changed because of it. Integrity. I know that that's, again, no matter what sort of partnership to be successful, you have to work in a way that actually inspires trust, is transparent, and is accountable, which also means you can ask questions. But I can ask, for example, let's just say Nikki, who actually is the events manager for this building. Nikki and I have known each other since Michigan State. There's some questions that I could ask Nikki because I have known her and we have worked together in different ways. Whereas, you know, some of the people here I've maybe known a couple of years. And then there's people that I met just day. So what I could ask someone that I'm just getting to know versus someone I've worked with for a short period of time versus someone that I've worked with for years is very different. So how does integrity show up and how are we able to hold each other accountable? That's again why building that community is so important, because when I really do know your heart and I really know your values, and even if you hurt me before, then we take the time to be able to work some things out outside of the group and then come back together as community, then we can work in integrity. Honor and respect. And that is, again, around all the dimensions of diversity, to recognize that there's different perspectives and expertise. And again, that's always the case. But again, if we're talking academic and community, there's great expertise, there's great knowledge in the community. So we have to check those assumptions. And that's where honor and respect often can get trumped. People don't even realize the ways in which they're stepping on each other. But if I know your heart, it makes it a little bit easier for me to at least ask the question, or to at least say to you, are you aware of what you just said? Or this is how I heard it. And let's keep, and if you didn't hear it right, or I didn't hear it right, then what do we need to say? What do we need to do? How do we correct it so that we're honoring and respecting each other? Iterative design solutions. So always focusing on learning, receiving feedback, and then integrating the improvements. I think a lot of times people set out with really clear, this is what they want to do, but if they're not willing to keep making it better, to keep listening, to allow new people to come in who might then bring fresh perspectives. But when you do that, that's part of what creates really sustainable transformational change, because it's an open system. Human-centered design, which is one of the things that I love to operate by, which really is meaning you're designing for that end user, for that, like resident, because you really want to seek to understand first, then you design with, and then you develop solutions that meet really core needs. Diversity and inclusion, I believe most of us here, kind of really understand that, but I want to start with the fact of appreciating it. Doesn't mean that you don't see, doesn't mean you have a certain perspective, but just appreciate that everybody, even if they're from the university, sometimes people think, oh, you're an academic. Well, okay, but they're more than an academic. So really appreciating the diversity that literally every single person is bringing to the table, working on the assumptions, but really working to include it and to see, like, how can I utilize what everybody is bringing for the better of the common cause and for the partnership, and to, again, be authentic. Iterative design solutions. I think I accidentally put that in here twice, so my apologies. And then last but not least, I'm always having an ear to hear. And sometimes this is the hardest thing, because people say, oh yeah, we're learning, but no, like always, be willing to hear something different. Again, I do find that is one of the things that I hear the most as a complaint from community, is they'll say, well, the funders already knew what they wanted to do. The university already knew what they wanted the outcomes, to be. They started out with this hypothesis, or, what have you. But literally being willing to hear, and again, even if it means starting from scratch, because again, I have worked with some initiatives in almost a decade. And then I've worked with some in a shorter period of time. And it almost doesn't matter how long you've worked together. It's about what's really the need. So some things you can address quicker than others based on the partnership. But sometimes something that was really great, you're like, ooh, that looked great. We even implemented it, was great, but it didn't really make the change that we decided. So when you hear people saying like, that wasn't it, then be willing to still have an ear to hear at every single phase of the process. So thank you.
Thank you, Chandra, for that. Okay, for that perspective, because I think it's a really nice, it's a really important complement to the principles that Carrie talked about, from a different, kind of coming at it from a different direction. And I think that they're complementary. So thank you for that. And it's a lot of food for thought. So I think, again, a lot of the themes that are coming up from our speakers today are going to kind of overlap and hopefully and mesh well with each other. So next, equity and partnerships. I believe, I'm sorry, my phone is back there because it's so I want to introduce Dr. Radlisha Sneed, who I said, again, is one of our new faculty members at Wayne State University in the Institute of Gerontology and Department of Psychology, who comes with really amazing experiences from her past experience with her past role in Michigan State University and their public health division in Flint. So please welcome Dr. Sneed.
Thank you, Haley. Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about equity and partnerships, and I'll give you some examples from my own research and sort of what my understanding of community partnership is and the ways in which academics and community partners can work together. All right, so just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was born and raised about 10 minutes from here. I grew up around Plymouth and Southfield, so born and raised in Detroit. I am a new assistant professor at Wayne State. Like Carrie, I am a gerontologist, so my research is with older adults. Before coming to Wayne State, I came in August, and before that, I was at Michigan State at the Flint campus, so about an hour north of here, doing a lot of community engaged research. And so really in all of my work, I'm interested in engaging community stakeholders, understanding the resources of the community, as well as the needs of the community, and then developing interventions accordingly. So before we start talking about equity and partnerships, I'm going to give you a basic definition of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about equity. So when we talk about equity and partnerships, what I'm talking about is having an ongoing two-way process where you build relationships, work together collaboratively, and share power. And so you've noticed I've underlined some of the words in that definition. I kind of just want to go over each of them briefly. So when we're talking about partnership, we're not talking about a one-time transactional relationship. We're talking about having a long-term relationship that lasts beyond one particular project, but that's really about establishing a long-term agenda for working together. We're talking about a two-way process. So community partners can learn from academics can learn from community partners. Some of the best lessons I've ever learned about research have come from the community partners working with me. We talk about building relationships. So that means having integrity, that our last speaker talked about. It means taking the time to actually communicate with others and establish mutual respect and trust. And then finally, I'm talking about sharing power. So decisions are made jointly between community partners and academics. Shared decision-making, ensuring that you have an even playing field with all of the partners involved. And so I have a few principles that I follow in thinking about how to really promote this equity that we're interested in partnerships. So the first principle I want to talk about is really about ensuring that community members have meaningful roles in all of your research projects. And so there are a few examples of this in the work that I've been doing over the last few years. And one of the principles that I really try to follow is that community members should be involved at the very beginning of the study. If you wait to involve community members after the project gets funded, it's already too late. And so it's really important to me in all of my work to ensure that community members have meaningful seats at the table. So just to give you an example of one of my research projects, the Flint Women's Study was a study that we conducted among women who lived or worked in Genesee County, where Flint's located. And importantly, this was a community engaged project where we had shared decision-making. We included an executive board that was composed of community residents who had a vested interest in the work. And that board was involved in every step of the way. So they helped to design the project, they helped to develop questions for the project, they helped to recruit, and they also were part of the key decision-making group for making recommendations about next steps. Another example of community partner involvement from the beginning. One of the other projects that I've worked on for the last few years is with the Flint City Center for Health Equity Solutions. And this is a federal grant that was funded to promote behavioral and physical health in the Flint community. And the way this is organized, there were two research projects supported by multiple cores that helped with administration and developing methodology. But what was important is that for each project, each core, there was an academic principal investigator and a community principal investigator. And so those investigators had equal decision-making power. They were both in charge, so to speak. And so decisions about how the project unfolded were really in the hands of both community and academic partners. Another principle that I try to follow in my work is recognizing that community partners are just as valuable as academic research partners. Academics may have lots of degrees, but community members have a lot of lived experience and expertise. And so in my work, I really try to honor that as much as possible. And one of the ways I really think about it is in terms of thinking about compensation. So community partners have expertise, academic partners get paid. So I think community partners should be paid as well. If we're valuing community partners and academic equally, then they should both be compensated accordingly. And so we are often tasked with thinking about how should we compensate community partners? And there's no one way to do any of this. I'll tell you what I do, but I think it really varies a lot based on the level of involvement and also just the structure of the funding. So for example, Carrie shared earlier this continuum that looks at community involvement from outreach all the way to shared leadership. And so oftentimes, when we're thinking about compensation, we're thinking about it based on that level of involvement. Another thing that also tends to matter as well is the type of funding that you might have. Is it a federal project? Is it a foundation project? How much money do you have? So here's one model that I've used personally, the shared leadership model. So in the case of the project, that was a federal grant with an academic PI and a community PI. We assume they give the same level of effort as much as possible. We try to pay them in the same way. This sort of represents the idea of equity in shared leadership. In another model, you may have a community collaborator who doesn't necessarily share leadership in that same way, but who provides valuable ongoing partnership. And so a person like that, I might have a subcontract with, I pay them an hourly rate based on how much time they spend on the project. There are also consultants. So these might be people that you talk to about your research. They don't necessarily have an ongoing role, but they're giving you feedback. And so often these are people who are in focus groups or who participate in surveys. I try to compensate them as well in my work. And then when we're talking about outreach, perhaps people attend a community meeting of some kind. And in that case, we may serve food, provide childcare, but it's really not necessarily this ongoing involvement. So these models really differ a lot depending on the level of involvement. All right, the third principle that I also try to follow is that I think it's important that research data and findings are shared back to the community. So I believe in this for a lot of reasons. If we're talking about equity, community members were involved in the creation of that knowledge. And so as a result, they should have access to it as well. Additionally, when we're talking about community dissemination, it really gives us an opportunity to think about the implications of our work. And then finally, sharing data back allows providers to think about how to implement findings immediately and locally. As one of the other presenters mentioned, really, the purpose of any of this work is to do work that's going to lead to change. So the sooner you get the information to the people who are going to use it, the faster you're going to be able to make change. So it's not enough for research just to be in our academic journals. It needs to be in the community. And so these are just some of the ways that I've gone about sharing research data. So on the left, we shared results from a community survey that was conducted in the years immediately after the Flint water crisis. And so we invite community partners in, tell them about the research study, give them an opportunity to ask questions. In another study, the Flint Women's Study, we actually sponsored a workshop. It was a half day. Participants came in, heard about our results. We had discussions as a group. We broke into breakout groups where we talked about solutions. And the goal of the day was to come up with solutions. And then the last principle I want to mention is that community members really should be actively involved in dissemination. And so I do this in a couple ways. First, any article that I write that has community engaged research as a focus includes my community partners. So they're co-authors on everything that I write. And then additionally, when I give presentations at conferences, community partners are part of those as well. So any community-based organization I work with is going to co-present too. So just in terms of take-home messages, it's important to understand what equity is and also think about the factors that contribute to equity. Shared decision-making, compensation, sharing of data, and co-dissemination of findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Radlisha, for again, adding additional principles or your interpretation of the CBPR principles. And I think it's really important to see kind of role models of researchers and faculty who are doing work in the way that you are. So thank you for that. So I know that's what I go back to sharing the screen. So before we get into dialogues and questions, we have, last but not least, Dr. Elizabeth Towner, who I've worked with for many years, who is also a faculty member in family medicine and public health sciences at Wayne State University, who's going to talk and give us a really awesome case study based on her work called Growing Together and Lessons Learned in Establishing and Sustaining Partnerships. So welcome, Dr. Towner.
Thanks to everybody for being here and to hanging in there so far. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today about actually it is my first community academic partnership. And want to thank Kaylee not only for the opportunity to talk today, but also for her tremendous mentorship along the way. What you may not know about me is that I didn't start in community engaged research. I started as a clinical trials researcher, and this is where I am now, and this is where I'm going to stay. I hope to someday have this segment back to clinical trials research, but this is where I need to be. And I'm here because everyone in the community has invited me to be here, and this is what they need right now. And so I'm just tremendously honored to have been able to work in the way that I have with families and children in Detroit, and to be able to share this story with you. I also was kind of reminded as the other speakers were talking of a principle we use in behavioral psychology called repetition with contrast. And this is a way of thinking about learning, is that hearing something that has the same idea, but in different examples helps you to learn. You're going to hear me talk about many things that my co-presenters have already shared, but in a different way. I think it's also important to recognize that because we're talking about the same things, when there's many things we could talk about, just how important those key principles are. So let's get started. Maybe, there we go. All right, so I'm starting with the end, and I'm talking to you today about our Family Pediatrician Partnership Community Advisory Board, or the FPP-CAB. This group was established in 2000. Caregivers of young children and one representative from a community organization. To date, they have completed a research capacity building curriculum, which I will talk a little bit more about later. They've identified and presented research priorities on many occasions, and they have developed a health campaign that really is targeting one of their top priorities for childhood obesity prevention. And they've done most of this work throughout the course of the pandemic. So to say that I am proud of them is an understatement, and I'm really looking forward to how this, CV of sorts grows now that we're able to be back in person. So if we start at the beginning, I just want to say, when you begin this work, you have to think about, why do I want a community academic partnership? It's not always the thing that needs to be in place. But when we come together, it's because we have common goals and interests. And for our group, we all came together because families and providers and researchers all wanted kids to grow up healthy and strong. That's at the core of what we do. We also came together because we're facing challenges in achieving that goal. And so some of the challenges families will face, is they may or may not see excess weight gain in early childhood as a problem. And the same thing, the diet and activity habits they have, maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not. Caregivers often feel blamed when there's discussions about excess weight with young children. For providers, they're not as likely to talk about obesity and overweight with young children. It's not necessarily the most comfortable conversation. And they also don't receive a lot of training in the methods that we ask them to use to have these discussions and work with families, like motivational interviewing, or even child behavior management strategies. But there's also systems level challenges. We do a lot of these discussions in well-child visits, which are extremely short. And there may or may not be options if there's agreement on goals to work on of what to do for the next steps. Our top of the line treatments are not available to most people. So that makes it even more challenging to know what to do there. So once you've kind of decided, okay, we've got a common interest, how do we identify and engage stakeholders? And this was a big lesson for me learned over the course of several years. What I'm sharing with you here are actually some examples from a curriculum that we're developing with community members. We'll talk about the research capacity building curriculum, which we often teach to our community members. This is information that they have shared with us as we start to flip that a little bit and think about how can we teach researchers about community engaged research. And so these are some of the qualities that they have listed in terms of being extremely important for forming those partnerships. So trust and patience, listening, sincerity, being really flexible with what you do, being open to others' ideas, speaking our language, and being aware of and working with different timelines. So these will all kind of get highlighted as we go through a little bit more today. They also talk about some of those first initial contacts. Those are extremely, extremely important. Reminding you to be personable. We're all people. So let's be people together. Connect with community leaders. You're going to have a much more high likelihood of connecting with people if you start with people that are in that community. And thinking about kind of how you reach out to people. So, thinking about, is this an email? Is this a phone call? Is this going to a meeting in person? And what you say first matters. We do an exercise that we put together. We took a kind of standard academic email and we asked our community members, if you got this, how would you feel? And they gave a lot of feedback, but we're intend to use that as we teach. For us, as we went through the Family Pediatrician Partnership, our initial stakeholder engagement goals were that we wanted to involve 2 to 3 pediatricians with practices in Detroit, and then 10 to 12 caregivers of preschool-aged children who met criteria for overweight and obesity, and ideally, who were patients of our pediatricians involved. This is kind of a flow diagram. I'm not sure where I'm going to put the thing here. We'll work on this together, of where we started. And so we began with an existing partnership with a community organization, and we accessed their partnership network in terms of pediatricians that they worked with. That partner shared some flyers, sent emails, initiated conversations. That took a long time, and we had a yield of 2 pediatricians who shared interest with us. When we identified those pediatricians, then there was a warm handoff, an introduction of myself and my project team. We went to the offices, we met in person, we met with providers and with staff. And importantly, we brought lots of materials about our projects, things for them to have, and food. This was a process that went on for a couple of months as well. And in the end, we had 1 pediatrician who agreed to partner with us. And at that point in time, we said, kind of tell us a little bit about how we can get to know some of the patients in your practice and how we identify people to participate. You know, we're bringing some tools that we have, but you know your group best. And so we kind of came up with a different multi-prong approach. There was a passive strategy of leaving flyers so that people could say, this might sound of interest, I'll contact you, or they signed a consent to contact form so we could contact them. We also worked with our pediatrician to identify days that there might be families that could be a good fit. And we sent staff so that they were on site. After the pediatrician introduced the project, we then met with them and explored their interest. So there were a couple of ways we did that. All right. And this is going to show you how we did with our engagement flow round 1. And this is just specific to families. We already talked about how we didn't really meet our goal in terms of pediatricians. And we didn't really meet our goal in terms of families either. You can see that we had contact information from about 56 families. 14 expressed interest in participating. We invited them all. 3 of those families showed up to our first meeting. But those 3 families were engaged throughout that year, and 2 are still involved with us now. So for those that came, they were, very engaged. So we learned some pretty important lessons in this first round. For us, again, our stakeholders were staying engaged once they joined. Providers were concerned about their time commitment and travel to our meetings. They were all in person at the beginning. Our recruitment materials weren't all that engaging, we learned. Our face-to-face contact is extremely important. Being a new at this is kind of hard, and being a new group is kind of hard. There's nothing to say we have been successful. It was a really big leap of faith for everyone that joined together. And our group really wanted to have more diversity in terms of their stakeholder composition. And for this, it meant adding in community representatives from community organizations. So we then really spent a lot of time talking about what do we do to increase engagement. And we came up with a new plan. We partnered with those who have tremendous experience, like the Michigan Cancer Health Link, the Office of Community Engaged Research, but we also accessed partnership networks that they were a part of. So we started going to farmers markets, and we went to one and we got invited to many. We went to health fairs and events, and we also asked organizations to refer families to us. The project team went, but also families that were part of our action council did as well. We had tangibles that we handed out, we gave resources, and we provided information. And we really revamped our application process. We had people sign an interest form. We did interviews after an application to be a part of the group, and membership was more selective. This just shows you how far we went. So the flyer on the left is kind of what we would typically do in the research world, and we thought it was great. All the information was there. We had a logo. It's not great, and you can see because we got to the one on the right, or yeah, this side, and it's a lot better. You can see the key pieces of information you need. It tells you just what you need to know and not more. There's not an abundance of words. We learned a lot. That came from our community advisory board members and also partners we worked with. These are just some examples of what we took with us on recruitment events. So you can see we had hopscotch. We gave out activity cards of 100 different activities that families could do with their young kids, inside, outside, and they didn't need anything more than what was at their house. It was an added bonus if they signed up and said, we have an application, we want to join you. For the sake of time, I'm going to kind of skip through some of this, but you can see we had 71 people that shared contact information. And we slowly went through, we invited 18 to interview, and 18 did interview. We extended membership to 11 and 10 joined and have been with us to this day. We also, through that process, met a new pediatrician and we engaged 3 community organizations. So we grew a lot. And again, 5 years later, we have 12 families involved, 1 pediatrician and 1 community organization. And our retention is pretty high. And I think that this is really important to note that, again, this continued even through the pandemic when a lot of thought was that groups like this would stop. Our group just got stronger. So once you're a group, now what? Some of this we've talked about already. It's important to form a mission statement. So we had, this is bringing together, so we're all on the same page. We had bones of this, but our group really told us what we wanted to do. They developed their own logo. We did have a memorandum of understanding. Again, you can go back and find the details of this, but that was critical so everybody knew their role. I want to highlight the investing in stakeholders. Again, you have to be flexible. We met in the evenings, offer options for attendance in person and hybrid like we're doing today. Have frequent and personalized communication. We're all busy and we need to help each other out. Provide resources to maximize engagement, which I'll talk about in a second, compensating stakeholders and capacity building. We want to make sure that our community members have the same knowledge and the same skills that we do so they can be equal players at the table in terms of research. Some of the other things to highlight here, we did provide childcare at all of our meetings. We fed everybody. We worked with transportation. If you drove there, we gave you a stipend to compensate you for that, or we would provide transportation in order to help you get to where we were. We do $25 an hour for most of our Action Council meetings, and we've gone through various iterations of just how that $25 is shared based on community feedback. Our capacity building is where we have spent a lot of time. And this is a curriculum that, again, Dr. Thompson brought here and first adapted to really focus on engaging community members and building their capacity. And I had the opportunity to work to adapt that. So it was tailored to research addressing childhood obesity prevention. And so it was a pleasure to go through this. It's about 11 modules. There are ways that you can do this kind of in person and more of a hybrid, where there is through the Community Scholars Program now, a way that you can access all of that training virtually. And so if you'd like to have any more information about that, certainly reach out to us and we can connect you. Just as an example, they go through this long training, and as part of it, they develop their own research priorities. You can see here, this is the list that our FPP-CAB generated. And at the top of that list is decreasing sugary drink intake for preschoolers. They developed their own research questions, and here's a few here. These were shared. We brought researchers to a meeting, and our group kind of talked about their history. They said, this is our priority. Here's the questions we want to answer. Is this an opportunity for us to partner? And they, like I said, they have developed their health campaign. This slide shows you some examples of the components of that campaign, which we're going to hopefully be rolling out soon. They wanted to target decreasing sugary drink intake in young children by increasing water intake. So they have a little packet that they're going to give out during well-child visits. There's a cooler that would include 2 water bottles that have lead filtration straws. And also have, the bones of the water bottle really help things stay cooler longer. They also have a lot of educational materials that are designed for caregivers to share with children about why drinking water is important and how it helps your body. They have recipes for how to make water more fun without adding sugar or any sort of extra calories. So they kind of wanted to sort of brand their own recipes. And then they have an educational handout that actually talks about juice, because they felt like we can't ask caregivers to just focus on increasing water if we don't talk about what they need to know about juice. And so this is an accordion sheet. That's why it looks really busy, but it has information on how to read nutrition labels, where you see all the different fruits. That's actually a game for kids. So they have to look around and try to find the fruit that has 100% and thinking about 100% fruit juice. And then there are recommendations at the bottom. And they designed all of this. So again, if we pull it all together with lessons learned, accessing existing partnerships is really important to getting started, but also establishing new ones is very critical as well. We found that an application process really helped us to identify extremely committed stakeholders. You need to invest in your stakeholders, and that can take on many different meanings depending on the type of work that you're doing. You need to ensure a continuous feedback loop. We asked for feedback on just about every single thing we did, and I feel like at this point, my group doesn't have to wait for me to ask, they just tell. And it's really important so we know how to do that. You know, community academic partnership is, it's a dedicated project team. There's a lot involved to making all of this happen. And you know, the part that I don't know that I fully expected and appreciated just how much your partnerships are going to be a family. And you know, you go in with one mission and you come out having spent a lot of time and done a lot of work together. And these are people that, again, you work with maybe in this capacity for a few years, but they're connections for life. So there's many people and organizations to thank as part of all the work that I just shared with you. And I'd like to make sure that they all get recognized. And I think at this point, we will transition to questions and answers.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? I want to make sure that can people online hear me too? Cool. All right. So I'm going to start from here. So thank you for that, Elizabeth. I know all the time in the, you know, the years you put into this. Mentioned having an ear to hear, right? You listened, it didn't work the first time around, so you made some changes and you kind of got a better response. So I think that's really important. And I appreciate that all of the speakers here really kind of gave these, you know, principles, kind of guiding principles for this work in very structured ways. And I love that you had what your community stakeholders, what your community members felt like were important in these kind of partnerships as we enter this work. So I appreciate all of that. So I want to open it up to questions, but I'm going to start with my own because you know, what we're talking about here today is not typically the way this kind of work is done, right? It's, I think, increasing when we think about participatory work, more engaged work. It is not necessarily the standard, not yet. You know, so it's something that we're moving towards. I can talk about certainly part of what happens on the academic or the research side. It has, because this takes time, right? It's high touch work, it's labor intensive, it's time intensive. Even though, again, I think, you know, and I think the literature is going to start to show that I think it strengthens our science and improves our outcomes, as our speakers have talked about. But part of it for on the researcher side is it takes time. And because of sometimes the pressures of universities and other institutions, that time is not always there. But one of the things I want to talk about, I'm going to ask, I'll start with Chandra, you know, and I think about this a lot. We're asking a lot of time from our community stakeholders as well. So maybe you can start speaking to that and what that means and what we should be considering as we try to bring people into this work and thinking about, you know, how much time it takes. You know, this is my job, right? So, you know, even as we're here today, you know, this is part of my work and what I get compensated for. So can you maybe speak to that?
Sure. I would just say that the opportunity is to be intentional about the pace and the space. So there are leaders who have more flexibility in the amount of time that they can give, but in order for them to stay in integrity with the communities and the populations that they serve, then the need to say, okay, well, based on what I know, this is what I can say and share. But based on what we're talking about here, I need to go back and confer with potentially many people to then be able to come back. So I would just say that that's what's really important is the pacing and the spacing. And of course, when you're working with a group of people, to me, the other piece that is really important that your comments kind of reminded me to highlight as well is the kind of the feedback loop, because there's some people who will be engaged throughout in very intimate ways. There's some people that will be engaged strategically, but it's important to then always loop back and to make sure that they're being informed. And again, whether there's the clarity around what does it take for that more engaged person to communicate back, as well as just the broader community. How is the initiative or the partnership then communicating, with a larger group? But yeah, it can take a lot of time. And again, it was spoken to in terms of the importance of recognizing that in order for some people to participate, it necessitates a value being placed on their time, which means that part of the initial planning is to include how are people going to be compensated in a variety of ways.
Thank you. So I don't know if any other of our panelists want to speak to that or have thoughts about it.
Thank you. And I think about it kind of in a couple of levels. I think there's certainly the financial compensation piece that needs to be there. But there's also what we share in terms of resources and skills and knowledge. There may be things that people are learning through their involvement with the partnership, but we often talk about how you can extend what you've learned and the roles that you've had into your life more broadly. And so it has to be, it has to be, again, we're learning from each other, but for our community stakeholders, what do they get out of this opportunity? In addition to, showing value through compensation for time.
I'll just add that for me, what's really important is making sure that we're not wasting partners' time. I remember I was working on a project and we got funded to do a community survey. And there were 4 other academics who also got funded to do this similar surveys from completely different agencies. It was because we talked to each other that we discovered that this was happening. So we realized we were asking the same partners to help us do this thing that we all needed to do, when it made more sense for us to come together, do one survey, and not waste the community members' time. So wasting time, understanding where people fit best, taking opportunities to collaborate and learn from previous experiences so that you don't waste partners' time, I think is a huge part of ensuring that they're able to continue to work with us long term.
Carrie, do you?
I don't.
Okay.
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 What every single person said.
Okay. Are there any questions in the room or comments?
There are some in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. So in the chat, there's some questions surrounding commenting on partnering with local artists or anyone representing the creative sector to create logos, images, and storytelling. Do you have any experience along kind of engaging that sector? Or thoughts about it?
If you could repeat the question.
Yes. Have you ever partnered with any local artists or anyone representing the creative sector to create logos, images, or storytelling?
Yes, I have done a lot of our logo development has been with graphic designers, but we have also had community members ask about bringing local artists in to do some of the design. I think there are challenges that you have to be mindful of with that. And in terms of conflicts of interest and some of the bigger picture ideas, but I think there are ways to integrate, people onto project teams. And so we've had some graphic designers who it's kind of they're independent. We've also had one that I work with who is a part of the organization that we partner with. So I think there are many ways you can do that. And I think it speaks to the importance of really having those discussions and negotiations up front before you get started. So that if that's an important part of your mission, you can talk to all the powers that be that are helping to support an action council or a partnership to figure out how to make it happen. But I think it is really important in terms of bringing the local feel and just everything local to the work.
Yeah, and I would just add, this is not as direct a response, but I think it's very much related, is that again, when we think about not just the branding of it, but even how we communicate what we're doing and what are the outcomes of it. One of the things that I consistently hear the greatest amount of energy around is when the community is engaged in, different sort of literally taking photographs as well as creating the art and even creating how you're disseminating and communicating the work. Because again, how many people are reading some quote unquote research paper, but if you want to put it, like in a format that, that everybody is excited about learning, like what's really the bottom line. Again, so much can be said through stories, through photography, through art that's created to really represent the work in a way that what's so beautiful about it is that if it really works for the youth, and especially if you get youth engaged, then everybody else relates to it. And oftentimes that can be a very significant part of the change in terms of how they're engaged, the questions that they're even asking, the whole process of really having people put their own words and their own images and their own illustration of what has been happening and what they want to see and what the change is.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, when in my history and kind of working in different settings, universities and hospitals and whatever, so often really the default is for people like, who don't necessarily have design experience or don't even have that kind of artistic background to kind of create some sort of logo, create something, which is not ideal. And it kind of loses, you're not engaging people in that way. It's not something that's appealing to people. But so I think that's really important to think about as we do this work. How are we working with our local artists or professional graphic designers to do this work? And what you're speaking to also is about data visualization. That's a term that comes up a lot. Sometimes we think about it with graphs and charts, but there are a lot of ways to communicate knowledge besides some of those traditional ways. So it's good that we're thinking about that. So thank you. Okay, yeah.
Hi, first of all, I just want to say thank you, because you all just knocked the ball out of the park. I don't think this subject is taken seriously enough. I don't think people hear it the way they need to. I don't think the people who need to hear it, are exposed, or it takes them so long to come around to fully appreciate really the gem that the community is. And so to hear you all share your firsthand experience appreciating the community for all that they can give you, for all that they care about, it's everything. Okay, so I would just like to give them some applause for that. So my question gets back to relationships. And I've been doing this work a long time, and I found that so much has to do with relationships and integrity and all the things you all said, and compensation. That doesn't hurt either. But these are all the things that we've worked out. We haven't worked out compensation. Compensation, you can just mess somebody's whole world up trying to compensate them if you don't know their full circumstance. Relationships, really listening and hearing what the community wants and needs. So can you all just share that one time that you just sort of like, wow, I would never have done this. I would never have thought about this had the community not said so.
And that's a great question to close us out. So
Very good. Hello, great question. Oh, I should be. Yeah, Von Seal, first of all, you're so kind and generous and sweet, so thank you. Yes, the thing that comes to mind for me that I did not anticipate is writing into one of my grants compensation for one of my partner's time. And what I learned was she had a very large role, but that funding put her housing, put her in a vulnerable situation because she lives in low income housing. And so that threshold that she would meet through my payment would have put her over that. So now I'm leading a conversation in a Zoom with a lawyer, the housing administrator, the partner, all of which I had not considered writing the grant. And so we had to learn how to address that issue. And then the other thing I would add is the process of the IRB, going through that process. My very first interview I did for a project, I realized about 90 minutes into that interview, the two big comfortable recliners that we were sitting in, it was about 90 minutes into that interview, I realized I had been swarmed with bed bugs and I hadn't checked my surroundings. I didn't realize that. And then I had to go through the process of this person also talked about being illiterate, I realized. And we had, I'd audibly talked about the agreement, consent agreement for participating in those interviews, but I was glad that I didn't have that person read it because he didn't start talking about that until about 40 minutes into it, right? And so all of those challenges, all I would say is be prepared to be surprised. But there are things you can't anticipate necessarily happening, but that you also have the responsibility to try and work through and address and deal with. So those are my two examples.
Just really quickly, one of the main things that comes to my mind is, and I think this may have been something you had in mind, is that for some, especially community leaders, because they are part of the community and want to be respected as being a part of the community and not differentiated from a compensation standpoint. So some people do want to be quote unquote compensated, like for their time. But I was a part of an initiative where everybody was going to receive some level of compensation, but they could have received more. And they actually were like, no, what we really need money for is not for me, because some of them literally like their whole life was around doing this particular work. And they're like, I'm going to do this work whether I ever get another dollar or not. But what I need is money to be able to basically what I call like marketing and street teams, so that I can really have people in the community get money so that they can help put out the word, so that they can learn more about this, so that they can print materials. I mean, just do the, have a copier, to have those local designers, which, maybe somebody that for $50, they'll do some amazing work, but it's like, but just having disposable funds to be able to compensate how you're going to engage the community and communicate, like with them, was really what they were like, we need more money for that, and unrestricted money, and to be able to distribute it in a way that makes sense, so that then that doesn't become a hang up, and so that it comes quick. Because I've also been a part of an initiative, which is unlike any that I've ever heard of, that the meeting was on a Tuesday. People had to fill out information in that Tuesday, and by that Friday, they actually received compensation, like in their accounts. So also the speed in which there's a connection between some type of compensation and it's going directly into their account, and the way in which they, would like it is just amazing. I've never heard of it before, but this is just this year, it happened just that quick. But again, that organization was set up to support grassroots individuals and organizations and finding out, and then they just were able to make it happen. So sometimes it's also, you have to have the right partner to make things even more flexible, because we know that, for example, with academia, there's a lot of bureaucracy, but there are some nonprofits that are happy to be the intermediary, that are set up to say, we know how to do this and we can get money to people quick in the form in which they're willing and desirable of receiving it.
Yeah, I can say I've learned a lot about compensation as well, certainly when working with community partners. Some of my issues, one similar to what Carrie described, we were working with a partner who was coaching youth soccer, and we were used to sort of having a person like this come on as a consultant, and we're paying them this amount of money. And I remember one of a partners saying, hey, you can't do this. I can't have my social security number linked to this and have this look like income, because this is going to jeopardize my family financially in terms of what kinds of benefits we're eligible for. I've had instances sometimes where it's easier to bring a community partner on as an employee of the university. But then I've also had issues. I do a lot of work with justice involved populations. And so having partners who couldn't pass the background checks needed to become university employees was an issue. Thinking about, I've done a lot of work in the faith community, particularly since COVID-19, and churches have changed a lot over the past couple years, and they have things that they care about, and they can't care about the thing that I care about until their needs are met. And so kind of understanding what that looks like and how that's changed over time, and really being able to talk to partners about things that weren't necessarily as obvious to me just because of the shift that we've seen. So lots of examples I could give.
I'm going to pivot a little bit because I too have had many experiences in the compensation world. I shared one when I spoke about my beautiful flyer that wasn't so beautiful. But I think one of the ones that comes to mind for me was actually some of the work that I did in COVID. I had a group that I had the privilege of working with, the Detroit Community COVID Crushers. And what we were trying to do, our method for how we develop health campaigns, we really wanted to kind of go at a faster pace. Instead of 6 months, we really wanted to turn campaigns faster to follow the information with COVID. And when we got to the point where we were doing our first health campaign, we had to figure out what they wanted to talk about. And that was point one. This method is intended to listen to the community. They have the priority. They say what we talk about. But I really thought, what the topics that were really live at that moment were testing and masks. And our group had talked a lot about that. And they said, no. That's not where we're going to go. We're actually going to focus on how to get together safely as families during the holidays. And I said, okay, well, we're getting close to Thanksgiving, and maybe we set this up so that we can get our campaign out for the December holidays. And they said, why would we wait that long? And I said, well, because we're taking a method that typically takes 6 to 12 months to do. And I thought like a month was fast. And they're like, we can do this in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay. And I mean, we all know how crazy that time was, how hard it was. I can look back and now I can say, I'm not surprised. They dove in, and they dove in hard. And I think that that's something that, I knew about this group, but I didn't know it in that way. And so I think when we form these partnerships, we need to be prepared for that people are there because they want to be there and they're invested in making change. And we need to be ready to respond, whether that's the focus of what they're doing or sometimes even the pace or exactly what they want to do.
Thank you for that. So I know we went a little over time. Thank you for your patience. So we're going to end it out now. And before we let everyone go, I'm going to turn over to Alex, who's going to talk about our next workshop, which is next month and actually in a couple of weeks.
Yes, our next workshop is May 18th, and it's around funding strategies for these kinds of partnerships. It's going to be hybrid again and at the Fisher Building. I'm going to send the registration link out to everybody who registered for this event tomorrow, along with our evaluation link for this event, tonight's event. So you can complete the evaluation and register for our next event, and we hope to see you there.
Yeah, we're going to have representatives from local funders and foundations, as well as national funders, who are going to talk about the relevance of community engagement in their funding opportunities and how they're viewing it. So please join us. We hope, whether it be online or in person. Thank you to all our speakers. This is phenomenal. I learned a lot, and I hope all of you did too. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.